and welcome to episode 53 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in visitor-free Napa Valley.
And this is John Denning in equally quiet Los Angeles.
At quiet times across the nation and really across the world right now.
As they should be, although I'm sure you'd agree with me, it's a little bit spooky. It's kind of eerie out there.
It's really spooky, especially if you have reason to go out and drive someplace and you realize you're one of the few people that are out. It is strange in the extreme.
I never thought I'd miss the sound of traffic, but here we are. I can also see the Los Angeles Country Club from my place. I can look out onto the golf course that is empty, and I've never been so tempted to sneak onto a golf course and play a few holes in my life.
Well, I urge you to stay inside and not do that.
Yeah, no.
I know
I
that a
do
lot
feel
of
like
golf
if anybody
courses-
chased me down, I could cough at them and get away.
Yes, and then you'd be hit with a felony probably.
Probably so.
I know that's not every golf course is empty right now, so I appreciate the fact that they're empty.
Yes, they are.
Well, we got an interesting episode today. It is called To Debt or Not to Debt, the law school question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it's certainly a strange time worldwide, but in terms of the calendar, this is law school decision-making time, both for the schools as well as the students. And because of some of the articles we have posted out there, we have a really highly trafficked post called Scholarship versus Prestige, When to Take the Money and Run. And it's a post that talks about, well, should you go for the lowest cost of attendance school in terms of taking your scholarship, or should you go for the school that has the highest level of so-called prestige?
Right.
And so we're going to talk about that today and go through some of the various choices that students have faced and some of the advice that we've actually given them.
Yeah, this is kind of cool. We get to look at some real-world examples of people trying to make these decisions and the advisement, or at least the, I would think, constructive encouragement we have given them.
Yes, and in some cases, the decision that they ultimately made.
Yeah, we actually know what some of these people
chose,
chose, which is cool.
So what are you going to drink for this episode, John?
Well, mostly out of just an abundance, as opposed to any sort of like particular topicality. We were going to do this about a week ago, and so many things have come up with the LSAT-Flex test in May and potentially now in June, as we'll learn more about this week, I think. We've had to push this back a week, but we were going to do it last Monday, which happened to be 420, which reminded me of one of my favorite beers, Sweetwater 420. So I went out and bought a 12-pack. Thinking it would be perfectly timely for last week. I still have a bunch of them, so I'm drinking a Sweetwater 420, despite the fact that we're recording this on 427.
So 420, your first thought was, I'll have a beer?
No.
Thanks for being honest.
No.
I appreciate it.
But my first, coherent for the podcast thought was maybe just a beer.
Well, I will tell you that I have gone with a classic tropical drink, one that I really enjoy and I've had off and on over the years. And I think it kind of fits the choice that's being made, because there can be some sting to this. And the drink of choice here is a Scorpion. So very interesting, kind of another rum-based drink. And again, if you have any familiarity with the history of the making of Mai Tais, the guys that were involved in those drinks, this is another one of their creations.
Yeah, this is a drink I've actually never had, but I know it has rum and brandy in it, so I'd probably get on board.
Yeah, a bunch of juices like orange and lemon, and then they put some sugary syrup in there. But it can be at times, especially if the alcohol, if they have a heavy hand with it, it can be pretty acidic. And a lot of times if you go to a tiki bar, they'll make them in Scorpion bowls. And it's often a special bowl with 4 straws, and everybody can just, party on.
Yeah, I think the closest I've had to this drink, in name, not in ingredients, is there's a bar under the street in Savannah, Georgia, that serves a Scorpion martini. And it literally is just a gin or vodka martini, but they put a little, preserved formaldehyde actual scorpion in the drink. And I convinced the bartender that if I ate the Scorpion, he could keep refilling mine. I think I had about 6 of them.
Yeah, I don't know if I support that decision to eat the Scorpion.
Hindsight.
Especially since I live in an area where there are scorpions, and we occasionally
I killed one
find
in your house
them.
one time.
Yeah, it's great. Nothing like waking up to a scorpion chasing my daughter around. Hasn't really happened that way, thankfully, but I'm waiting for the day when I'm like, what is this, Daddy? I'm like, don't touch it.
Yeah. Anybody gets to Savannah and wants to eat a Scorpion, there is a Scorpion martini bar. I encourage you to seek it out.
And I encourage you not to seek it out. So you choose whose advice you want to follow here.
It's a pretty easy choice. What are we listening to?
Well, this is more, I think, your choice than mine, although we were looking for a monetary theme.
Yeah.
Since this is really about taking on debt and going to a really higher ranked school or avoiding debt and oftentimes choosing for a lower ranked school. So I'll let you take the honors here.
Fair enough. Yeah, this is an old song by Steve Miller Band from, probably the mid to late 70s, something like that, 76 or so.
That would have been my guess as well.
Yeah. It's a song called Take the Money and Run, which I think you will find to be thematic for a lot of the advice that you're about to hear us offer tonight. Take the money, run. Steve Miller Band was a massive act in their day. Jet Airliner and Fly Like an Eagle, Jungle Love, The Joker, probably their most famous song.
And a band that I don't really much care for.
Yeah, to each his own. He's a notorious jerk, or at least an outspoken artist. He famously got in a lot of trouble as he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for basically complaining about the fact they only gave him one guest ticket. He's like, what about my band? What about their wives? They were going to charge him $10,000 for each additional person he wanted to bring to his own induction ceremony.
Well, wait a second. Is that Steve Miller being a jerk or the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
The way he went
jerks?
about it, he threatened to boycott the ceremony and was yelling at other artists. The people who inducted him, Dan Auerbach, I think, from the Black Keys, actually said later on that they regretted being a part of it. He was that much of a, I'll spare the pejoratives. Jerk.
Maybe. I don't know. It seems to me like he had good cause.
Debatable. I think his heart was in the right place. His mouth, maybe not. Anyway, that's Steve Miller, Take the Money and Run. Before we get into those decisions, though, let's talk quickly, if you're game, about some further developments in the LSAT world.
Or at least occurrences.
Occurrences, yeah.
So earlier today, in fact, relatively early this morning, the LSAT-Flex sign-up period began. But for some of you, it began earlier than others, which I found to be various turns hilarious, frustrating, confusing, and perhaps expected.
Yeah.
I think those would be the 4 quarters of the pie about how I felt about it. So we knew that it was coming today. They delayed it a couple times until today, apparently due to issues with ProctorU, although I've heard that ProctorU takes exception to that, and they felt that it wasn't entirely their fault. I don't care. It got delayed. I'd rather have it be done correctly than be on time. So, although I'd prefer both in a perfect world. So it was set to open this morning, but some very savvy students were able to figure out how to get in there. Very clever. So what they were able to do is go into the ProctorU interface and then kind of use the forgot password function. And because all the LSAC information had been preloaded, when they did that, it connected their accounts as long as they had the same email. And all of a sudden, even though they weren't supposed to be able to register until noon Eastern time, they were able to register several hours early. So as soon as people started alerting me that, I posted it, and then a bunch of other people were able to do it, which is kind of cool. Now, for those of you who are like, wait a second, I didn't see that, I might have gotten screwed by it. LSAC very kindly wrote me and said, hey, we're aware of the fact that this happened. In a sense, what they said was very sharp-eyed students, well done. However, there are 14,000 different seats spread across these
2 days,
various times.
Yeah.
And so we don't think anyone's really going to be blocked out. Even if at worst, one of their times was full, they'd be able to go 20 minutes before, 20 minutes after.
Yeah.
So kind of like a little tempest, but I don't think anyone was really harmed by it aside from the frustration of realizing that other people either were getting early access or had gotten early access.
Hey, look, I'm all for clever getting some reward.
Yeah, somebody wrote me and they said, I felt a little guilty. And I wrote back and I was like, it was available to you, so why not take advantage of it? You didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to judge you on that. If you're like, okay, I can do it and it's right in front of me. Clever.
Sure.
What's the availability that LSAC has made for these students taking the LSAT-Flex?
Well, this is pretty great. And frankly, at least from my own personal expectations, I think this was more generous than I was anticipating. They've actually opened up both days, the 18th and 19th of May, which is a Monday and a Tuesday, from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you're on the West Coast, you can really get an early start in 20-minute increments. So 3 different availabilities per hour. So that's about 30 different slots on each of those 2 days that people can sign up for. I did not expect that degree of availability, let's call it. But I'm happy it's there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, given the fact that typical LSAT is you show up at this time, you got to be there by 8:30 or 12:30. This is certainly a lot more flexible, and maybe that's where they got the Flex name out of this, although I don't actually think so. But either way, it certainly plays on that thematic idea, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
You can also see what they're doing. They know they have a proctoring issue. They can't do thousands of people at one moment. They couldn't do like 8,000 people. This spreads everybody else across these 2 days and makes it a lot easier. It load balances, technically, is what's occurring here for them.
So, one proctor could actually handle 3 to 4 people a day with this kind of spread.
I'm sure more than that. It'd be very interesting to know
bouncing, simultaneously.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to know what the specs are. Like, what's the maximum proctor load? 10? Who knows? But either way, this is how it is set up.
Yeah.
And if you need to register for that, or at least sign up and complete your registration, it's now open and available to you for those 2 days. And there are some other days, as we talked about last week, typically for accommodated test takers, and they'll be able to sign in and do the same kind of thing.
Yeah, they mentioned the 21st and 22nd in particular, a couple days later for accommodated people. But you've got an option to sign up for your test too. I know a lot of people were experiencing technical issues with the website.
Yeah.
That old 405 site not found error.
Yeah, they got the 405, and it was very frustrating, and I got a ton of messages all of a sudden. I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Obviously, this was the ProctorU website, not LSAC's. I know LSAC's data was in there, and if you kept refreshing, it would actually store your progress, and eventually you could register. So it wasn't a complete barrier, but it certainly was frustrating and time-consuming. And as far as I could tell, it was an independent event. Now, it might have been that the rush of LSAT students coming in crashed their servers. If you have thousands of people just show up all of a sudden and start refreshing. And of course, my advice was refresh more, which even further kind of like taxes the system. But if you're already in the process, you have to keep on refreshing. You need to get to the end at that point because you've already started it. So a bit counterintuitive perhaps, but also necessary.
Yeah. Let me, and you don't have to speak to this if you don't want to, but I'm curious to get your take. How would you say the Flex rollout is proceeding so far in terms of smoothness, in terms of just general optimism?
I think I'm going to answer that question by first off answering it without any context.
Okay.
A couple delays in the sign up, definitely some problems signing up. People were able to get early access, probably a C.
Okay. You're giving it a grade. Fair enough. I didn't know if I was going to get like 1 to 10 and this is a 3.
I'll give it a C on that. Okay. However, and I've said this before, when you put in the context of what we're dealing with and the fact that they had to really put this together very quickly, I think you have to give them a pass on this. I mean, yeah, if they'd had months to prepare for this and this is the way that it came out, I would be like, not happy.
Yeah.
However, I'm well aware of the kind of fast moves that they've had to make and the fact that really, 4 to 6 weeks ago, this test didn't exist. This idea was just a glimmer in somebody's eye. And to take a major testing event, be able to kind of set it up online and adjust all your scoring and your testing, I realize that's a lot of moving parts. And so I'm willing to actually be like human about this.
Yeah. Well, C is a passing grade. So if that's the way you want to go about it, your C is a pass.
Yeah. I mean, in the context of what we're dealing with, no problems would have been an A. In the context of what we're doing, these kind of annoying but minor and non-catastrophic, non-prejudicial, I'd give it a B.
Great inflation.
I'm a generous,
I'm with you
spectator.
on this. I think in principle, what they're doing is fantastic. On paper, what they're doing is a little shaky, but So far, at least people are able to register. There have been some delays. There have been some issues, some 405 errors and things, but it seems to at least be working itself out.
Yeah. Nothing that's happened so far was like, that's the end of the line for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I realize that people get frustrated, and when they've had to pay money to an organization and they see these types of problems, and then tests were canceled and they didn't know what was going to happen with the next test, there's a sense of building frustration over time from what is really a series of events that all add up. Mm-hmm. I get that. I'm not excusing any of that. I'm just kind of saying, when placed against the background of what we're living through, I'm willing to be reasonable here. And I think if we were all got in the same room with them, and I mean all the students too, and all of a sudden they were in front of us and they're like, look, we did our best. This was crazy that we had to do this. We never imagined we'd have to do this. There's thousands of people. We're trying to make sure that you can take this test and get a score. We swear, guys, we're doing our best. I would be the guy on the stage who'd be like, I believe that.
Yeah.
So I'm cool with it. My big fear will continue to remain not the sign-up process, not these little delays, not these hiccups with the 405. It's going to be on the 18th and 19th, because when those days start, I'm going to have real trepidation over what might happen. I'm going to have my fingers crossed, and I think we said this last time, every finger digit you can find will be crossed.
Like I said, I kick my shoes off to cross my toes. Yeah.
That's what I'm really worried about and what I'm focused on. And I'm praying that goes as well as possible. And as you know, I'm not somebody who prays. So
no. And I'm not someone who wears shoes. So this is all
doing all sorts of things that we never do.
Well, as much then as I respect LSAC for making this at least a possibility in May and probably June, we've done a few things ourselves, just to reiterate for people, to remind people of some of the resources that we've put out there. We have added LSAT-Flex exams of our own to our digital test page, where you can download, you can buy them yourselves. We have added these for our course students, both in the longer courses like the full live online that we're offering now, and as well as the accelerated course next weekend that's geared specifically to the Flex test. We have made some Flex tests available for our students as well. So
yeah, and we've added those into our tutoring packages now, as well as our courses and so forth. So it's no longer just like, all right, it's out there for you to purchase. Yes, it is if you're not one of our in-course students, but if you are working with us directly for instruction, it is available to you, typically inside your online student center.
That's right. Yeah.
So the other two things I would probably notice is, interestingly enough, as far as LSAC is concerned, they have, it looks to me like they've stopped their podcast. The last update, I think, is around March 12th. Usually it comes about every month. So it looks like this whole process has just kind of ground them to a halt. I will say that bothers me slightly, because communication during a period of time like this is so important.
Yeah.
Communication when they were delaying the sign-up period for the LSAT-Flex would have been really key. Communication about data is also really key. Like, what's happening with the law school admissions deadlines? What percentage are we at compared to last year? And I realize things are now different, but still keep that data flowing. Let us know how many people that they were able to register for the LSAT-Flex. It helps people to understand and feel more comfortable moving forward when they kind of have a better sense of some of the solidities around them. So I would really urge them, keep the communication up, keep the information flowing. That is going to keep everybody as calm and happy and comfortable as possible.
Yeah, we're doing our best here, but of course we're only as good as the information that we're able to get to. So yeah,
that's exactly right.
Make some noise, LSAC. We want to know what's up.
Yes.
Schools as well, frankly. We've been in touch with a lot of law schools over the last couple of weeks about their deadlines, how they're treating Flex, what they're going to do with extending things to accommodate maybe March and April cancellations, the May and June test takers. And we have a few updates on that. I'm sure we'll probably post a blog or something with some of the details about specific schools at some point.
I think we will. You know, the interesting thing about that is that you're really seeing various ways that schools are handling this information.
Mm-hmm.
So, and sometimes what I see from schools is very rigid. Sometimes what I see is really reasonable. I mean, like, for example, we talked to Columbia and they were pretty flat about it. We are no longer accepting applications for fall 2020 entry. Our deadline was February 15th.
Wake Forest, the same. University of Southern California, the same. Super strict. We're not taking these flex tests this year. We'll take them, but for 2021.
That's actually a really important point. What they have said in many cases is we'll use the LSAT-Flex for next year.
Right.
And then there's a bunch of schools that have said, hey, we've pushed things back and become more reasonable. Duke did that, for example. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a reasonable way to approach this. I, to be honest, don't understand schools like Columbia or Carolina that are saying, oh, no, we're fine. Our deadline was before. Wake up to the situation and realize that it might have affected people in a way where they didn't have an opportunity. Even though you think February 15th was relatively early, there were people out there being affected by this around that time and prior. So I don't understand the mentality of that, but we'll post a blog on that and kind of update some of the anecdotal information that we've discovered. It's certainly mixed. It depends on the school as to whether or not they've extended deadlines. But what does not appear to be mixed is that they all seem to be saying, whether it's for this year or for next year, they will accept the LSAT-Flex results.
And treat it as just another LSAT. Yeah, just another score out of 180. Happily and anecdotally, the vast majority of schools seem to be pushing their deadlines back and will take at least the May test results, many taking June, very few taking July. But you've got a couple more cracks at this thing if you're signed up for May or June for most schools.
Yeah, and I will close this segment out by saying you and I continue to be asked about the June and July LSATs and whether or not they will be flex tests. And we're both on record as saying we don't know with any certainty because it's a virus and we really just don't know, just like no one else knows. So no one can tell you. I don't even think LSAC at this point really knows. However, I think both you and I agree that quite strongly that June will be another flex test.
I can't see a way around it. In fact, I've heard whispers that there may be an announcement this week.
Yeah.
Nothing official, of course, because that's what we're encouraging LSAC to do, is to make some more official things. But I've heard the rumor.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to them a little bit more about this, and we'll see. I heard that rumor as well. I don't know if it makes a whole lot of sense to me. I feel like they should, or they will want to run this flex test first and then make the call. It does seem early
for them to announce it when they've got this whole set of 14,000 guinea pigs coming up.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me from a logical standpoint, but whatever information that we're able to get from them and whatever news that we can share, we certainly will.
Yeah.
But our opinion is June will be a flex test. July, I don't know. That's more 50-50 to me. I think we need to see how things shake out. That's, a number of weeks away still. Yeah. So when you write us and you ask, I know a lot about the LSAT. I don't know anything about epidemiology. So it's really guesswork. And I've said that to people over and over. I'm like, I really don't know. It really depends on the virus. I can sense how things are going and make a prediction, but I think most people can do that too. So
yeah, at this point, even speculating on July is a little bit, I think, foolhardy, premature.
Yeah.
For personal reasons, I hope by July we're back to normal, because I have 3 friends coming to stay with me for July 4th.
Maybe. It's like when you kept saying to me that you're going to go to the Masters, and I was like, no, you're not.
You're not.
Not going to happen.
Well, technically, I'm right. No. It just won't be till November.
Whatever, you know what I mean?
I do.
Let's go on.
Break my heart. All right, let's get to speaking of hearts, the heart of the matter for today. This is all about law school admissions decisions. And we did one of these, God, has it been about a year ago? I feel like this was one of our first few episodes, episode 5 or so. We did something along these lines.
About a year ago.
Yeah, about a year, which is crazy to think we have both lived that long. Still doing these.
Because of all of our constant drinking?
Yes.
I may lose my voice. This scorpion has got a definitely acidic edge to it.
And I realized I only brought 1 bottle of beer down here, and that was a mistake.
What are you thinking?
You'd think we'd be better at it by now, Dave.
I know. I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah.
You need work.
I do need work. Here's how I thought we could maybe run this. A lot of these are questions that you mentioned were posted on that blog, Scholarship versus Prestige, one of the most heavily trafficked blog posts that we have, and we get a lot of traffic, which means you've seen a lot of this content, you've answered a lot of this content in text, in replying to people in the blog, but I thought we could almost turn this into like an interviewer-interviewee kind of format. Well, I'll pose some of these questions to you, hit the high points, summarize them as best I can for anyone listening. Some of these get a little bit data dense. And then you come back with what you think would be the right kind of guidance or advice.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it relatively non-data driven. And we'll post the link. So if you want to go actually read the discussions, you can see that some of them will flesh out a little bit more deeply than what we're going to be able to do here. Sometimes if you start rattling off a bunch of statistics, like the schools ranked this was the scholarship I got, this is the cost of attendance, this was their employment statistics, man, it's impossible to follow if you're jogging or doing whatever. So we'll try to keep it like broad questions. And we've tried to select a pretty decent array of school choices that were being made, both geographically, from a ranking standpoint, you name it.
Yeah, this isn't all going to be like Yale versus Harvard kind of decisions, although some of those might come up. It's really across the board.
There's one at the end that is, to me, one of the funniest ones I've ever gotten.
We'll close on that one, maybe.
Yeah, that's definitely the one. It's 2 top 4 schools, and I'm like, I think this one's pretty clear.
Right. So yeah, to me, the real moral of all this that we're going to try to pull from it or extract from it for anyone listening is not going to be this intensive like data analysis. It's going to be more like the ethos of how you make certain decisions. So you should be able to apply this, I hope, to whatever your own personal decision-making considerations are.
That's exactly right.
That's the goal. All right, cool. Let's start with this first one. And interestingly enough, there are 4 schools under consideration here. So it began with a nice compliment. And I'm a sucker for a compliment, so I'll read it. It says that PowerScore's LSAT prep course is a big part of what got me into multiple law schools. So I think it wise to come back and ask for some advice on choosing where to actually go now. Congratulations. To start out, my career goal is to become a deputy district attorney. No matter where I go to school, I hope to eventually return and work in my home of Orange County, California. That being said, here are my offers. So 2 considerations. Deputy district attorney is kind of the endpoint goal. And of these 4
Orange
schools...
County.
What's that?
He wants to be back in the OC.
And yes, geographical wants to land back in Southern California.
Yes.
Who could blame him? Here are the 4 schools. The first is Pepperdine, ranked 47 or so. The cost of attendance estimated at $196,000. So not cheap, but this was the highest ranked school among the 4. School 2, Loyola Marymount, here in LA, in fact, which is ranked 62, cost of attendance about $147,000. It's about $50,000 cheaper.
Let me just insert one thing. You're not reading the scholarships that were received at each school, and that is by design.
Yes.
So when we say cost of attendance and someone's like, man, I got into Pepperdine and it was $300,000, that is because we are accounting for the scholarships that he received, other things that might actually be relevant to the situation, such as can you live with your parents? So
exactly, yeah. Where geographically you'll be living, what it costs to live there, those sorts of things. So scholarships are great to know, but ultimately this is all about debt, total debt.
Yeah.
And there are many components, many factors to debt beyond just what the school's going to charge you. So that's what we're trying to factor in here.
All right, so Pepperdine, 47th at $200,000. Loyola, 62nd, $150,000 roughly. What's the next one?
Yep. USD, University of San Diego, about $125,000. They're ranked 83rd. So we're slowly making our way down. And then finally, with a full ride, Chapman, 111th ranked school. Cost of attendance here, the debt would be about $40,000. That's just living expenses and things.
And one of the reasons I like this is the first question is because it really encapsulates what occurs with rankings. You know, people complain about the rankings, and I think justifiably, but they also tend to be very rigid in terms of like the money that you get. The highest ranked school, it ends up costing him the most. The lowest ranked school would be the cheapest. And it actually is the higher the rank, the higher the cost of attendance is the final number there. Now, this student was really, really helpful in terms of providing information. And I always tell people this. It's like, if you ask me, well, should I go to this school or that school? I can't answer that question for you because I don't know so many things that you need to provide as information, including debt levels, your preferences, the type of law that you want to practice, you know, your long-term career goals. All these things make a difference. And in this case, he was super helpful in terms of talking about certain things. And, for example, one of the things that he said was that he went to Chapman and he really felt that he probably needed to move on from Chapman to grow as a person, which I thought was a really good kind of like self-analysis point. And he also told us that he did not like Los Angeles.
Yeah, I saw that comment.
So interestingly enough, we can kind of like roll through this. Now, when I look at a decision like this, to me, it's all about long-term goals, the debt that you have, as well as the kind of employment outcomes that you get at each school.
Right.
And when you compare Pepperdine and Loyola Marymount, the two best schools by ranking that he got into, you're talking about a $50,000 difference. But to me, the Pepperdine employment results aren't really worth $50,000 more. And so that I told him that flat out. I was like, look, I love Pepperdine as a school. If you want to go to a school with the best view in the world, Pepperdine is for you. It's
I think
in
you
Malibu.
love it as a campus.
Yeah, it's on the side of the hill looking out over the Pacific. It is serene. Always enjoyed my time at Pepperdine. Big fan of that school.
Same here.
One of the best NCAA tournament games I ever saw was, I think, in '82 with Pepperdine and NC State. And I was a little kid watching it on TV and just was like enthralled at like 1 a.m. They played like a double or triple overtime
You're
game.
responsible of your parents, but that's pretty awesome.
I was a big basketball fan when I was a kid and still am. Anyway, for me, it was easy enough to say, is Pepperdine worth $50,000 more for the employment outcomes? And it sure didn't feel that way. And part of that was you're only 15 places higher in the rankings.
Than
if
Loyola,
this had been, Loyola number 62 versus the 21st ranked school, then all of a sudden the 50,000 is probably worth it. But the employment outcomes would have shown that.
Yeah.
Usually with the higher ranked schools, you have better employment outcomes and you can see exactly what you're paying for. So that left me, the next level battle is kind of Loyola Marymount versus San Diego. And there's like a $20,000 difference between these two schools. And frankly, Loyola has better employment outcomes in a demonstrable way. So I made mention of that. I was like, if it's just about the numbers, Loyola would be the winner here.
Yeah, it's worth the $20,000 in that comparison.
Yeah, but it's never just about the numbers. He had told us, I went down to San Diego, I visited the school, I loved it. I felt super comfortable there. Loyola, it's Los Angeles. I'm not a fan of LA. That was literally what the question said. He's like, I don't really want to live here, but it feels like it might be a pretty attractive choice. So I made a point to him that was like, yes, Loyola's got the better job outcomes. But if you don't enjoy yourself and you don't enjoy the surroundings that you're in law school, it's a really big deal to me because I feel like you'll suffer. And if you suffer at doing something, it's harder to do it and it's really hard to do it well. And so ultimately I was like, yeah, I probably prefer Loyola here just on the return on investment, but you have to really balance that with how you feel about it. So
yeah, there's a subjectivity to this that unfortunately numbers can't always speak to.
Yeah, I can tell you with the numbers.
Pure analytical, and that's one thing. But you also have to realize, and this is advice we will echo as we look at some of these other considerations, other decisions. You have to go to a place where you're going to be happy, or as happy as you can be. You're going to be comfortable. You're going to like essentially where you are for these 3 years or longer.
That's exactly right. And in this case, there's a lot to recommend Loyola Marymount. He felt there was a lot to recommend San Diego, and I think those are both valid viewpoints. So it's kind of a wash there. And then we get to Chapman, which from a cost of attendance standpoint was significantly cheaper, over $80,000 cheaper than San Diego. It was about $40,000. He could actually save money by living with his parents.
Yeah.
But look what he said about it. This was my undergrad, and I think I need to move on.
Yeah.
And it's tough to do 7 years at one school unless you are absolutely in love with it. I don't know that I would have been the type of person who wanted to do 4 years at Duke and then 3 more years there afterwards. It's like, okay, I like cities a little bit.
I couldn't have done 4 more minutes at Georgia Tech, so I completely understand.
Love that. Oh, boy, that's good. I could have done 4 more minutes at Duke. So it wouldn't have been too difficult. But at the same time, Durham is not my favorite town in the country. There's a lot better ones. So either way, the point being was as we looked at the job outcomes, I'm like, Chapman is a tough sell. They are working hard to get better.
Yeah.
And they've had improvement in their numbers, but there's a reason that they're the cheapest school. They struggle. And he was really worried about some reputational aspects as well, coming on back. So I felt that Chapman really was the clear winner in terms of debt avoidance. If it's all about the debt, then it's a clear win. But given all the rest of the stuff that he said about it, it didn't feel so comfortable to me for him. And so I kind of kicked that back to him, and he kind of came back and we talked a little bit more about it. And then ultimately he was like, I made the choice for San Diego. And you can see that that's, lower ranked than Loyola Marymount, but it's also cheaper. It's also more highly ranked than Chapman, but considerably more expensive. But this is why this is such a personal decision for each person. That was the school that he had gone to where he really felt great. And Chapman offered him a fantastic deal, but he wanted to move on from that. And he didn't want to be in LA. Pepperdine's really not worth it compared to these other schools, the additional cost, despite the incredible view. I did give him one tip, and this is something that I know from living in LA, and you certainly know it, and that is that a lot of the people who go to downtown law schools, such as USC and Loyola,
Southwestern,
they don't live there. You're not living right next to the campus or really on campus. Usually they're living in like West LA, by UCLA.
Right.
And that kind of changes it because West LA is great. I love living out there. And then you just take the 10 downtown to get to class and come on back. So I think, sometimes you end up talking about schools and it's like, well, I don't want to live there. I'm like, well, I wouldn't want to live there either. I would not want to live next to the USC's campus, but I can live out in West LA and it's cool, man. Westwood's fine.
Yeah. So I actually respected the decision this person ended up making, going with the University of San Diego, driven in large part by the advice you gave, which is go to a place where you feel like you'll be happy, where you kind of like where it is that you are, where your feet are planted.
Yeah, and despite all the conversation that we'd had about numbers and employment outcomes, he actually made a point when he wrote back to say, out of all the advice you gave me, the thing that really stuck with me was what you said about choosing the school I thought I would perform best at. So I think that's really cool. And he was super gracious. He was like, I just want to say thank you guys. PowerScore's prep course was a big part of what me got into law school. And the fact that you personally took time to answer my questions, really meant a lot. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I was more than happy to help on all levels.
Of course.
And I think, he's made a decision that he's comfortable with. And when you're comfortable with your decision like that, you're going to be able to go out there and kill it. So best of luck.
Yeah, full steam ahead.
Let's do this.
Cool. Let's look at the second
for
one.
us.
This one fewer schools in the mix. Here's how it begins. Hi, Dave. Of course, they're coming right to you. I heard about this blog on your podcast, decided to give it a shot. Here are the 3 schools in question. Some good ones. There's UCLA, ranked about 15, cost of attendance, 40 grand, let's say. I'm rounding a bit. Northwestern, ranked 12, cost of attendance, $110,000. Significantly more. And then there's ASU, ranked 24. We didn't get a total cost of attendance here, but I do know it was full tuition and fees, which were covered through the O'Connor Honors Program there.
Yeah.
So it was reported as $0. Of course, it's never $0. You're going to spend some money, but considerably cheaper than the other 2, presumably.
That's exactly right. I think, they were in Phoenix area, so it was already kind of there, but you're still going to pay to be attending to law school. So there were also some other, I guess you could call them prejudicial factors here.
Yeah. Do you want me to list those out?
How about you hit them? Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple of considerations that the person made us aware of. They want to end up in the western states, so obviously UCLA and ASU would suit that right off the jump. Comfortable moving to any of those cities mentioned for school. There was an interest in entertainment law. It wasn't a deal breaker, but that seems to be at least where their considerations were pointed. And then not interested in public interest, but open to all other areas. So debt averse, but willing to take some loans if the person's reasonably confident they'll pay off. Which, of course.
Which is, it's a really good encapsulation of how I look at it. I'm also debt averse when I look at these decisions, but if you feel like the return is pretty solid, I'm willing to like open it up a little bit. So this is interesting to me because public interest is off the table, which in our next decision, it's going to be right in the center of the decision making. This means this person's looking for really, the kind of job where you're going to have to be able to repay your debt. You're not going to get an LRAP program that is paying it back. And so one of the things I went in there, I was like, this is a really good set of schools. I mean, you've got the 9th, the 15th, and the 24th ranked schools. And of course, the debt is appropriately spread out as well.
Can I jump in real quick? I'm sorry to cut you off mid-sentence, but
Please.
You mentioned Northwestern is the 9th. I mentioned it originally as the 12th. Part of this has to do with where we source the rankings from. I should make clear to anyone listening.
And also Northwestern jumped recently.
They did. Yeah, so I may have actually pulled that 12 from a 2018-2019 list where they've actually gone up.
Yeah, and I think when the question was posed, it may have been that they were that.
Entirely possible.
So, yeah, this is usually U.S. News is the default rankings that everybody uses. That's what this was in reference to.
Typically, although I know you're going to mention another resource here in just a bit where you get to pull some job data from.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of resources. And the one you're referring to is we use Law School Transparency. So the lstreports.com takes all the 509 reports from the ABA for every law school and compiles the data in really nice, visual, easy to see ways. And so I often will look at that just to kind of like get a really quick sense of the difference between the schools, especially when I'm not as familiar with the school off the top of my head, which for ASU, I actually know a fair bit about it. They've been involved in some decisions that I've helped people with recently. I know a ton about UCLA from having lived really close to it. And Northwestern is, it's a T14 school, so I'm pretty familiar with that. But I always look at it regardless because it'll give you a really good kind of like comparison. And that's what I did here. I actually used that information to kind of show this student how they ranked up. And so the first thing I did was I compared ASU to UCLA. So in rankings, they're pretty close, 15th and 24th. But one of the metrics that I like to look at is kind of like what I call a power employment ranking, which is all the placements at law firms, not of 100, but of 250 employees, lawyers, or more, combined with all the clerkships, both state and local, because those are often like the cherry jobs that people really want. And it really helps you to see what you're paying for. Now, we know ASU is supposedly free. It's not, but whatever. It's close enough to free. Their power employment percentage is around 16%. UCLA is 38,000. Theirs is 44.2%. To me, that is a really big difference. And you see it in the big law category. That's where the real big difference comes in. And when I looked at that, I was like, you're talking a realistic difference of probably $20,000 based on these numbers. And that the employment outcomes are, almost 3 times as much in terms of power outcomes, which is really where prestige is. To me, that looked worth it. I felt like UCLA was the better choice there, even if ASU might have been, like the more hometown, apparently cheaper school. It might not be in the long run. And that is, by the way, with full acknowledgement that ASU has been working hard on their rankings over the years. But as I just saw with a student I was helping, he was trying to leverage a Florida offer with Emory. And they're not that far apart in rankings anymore because Florida has had a really significant rise. But Emory's response to Florida's offer was, we don't care. They're not at our level.
Right.
And, they didn't say that. That's the gist of it. Emory's like, look, we've been like a top 25 school for years. Florida's just new to the game. We don't even know if they'll stick around here. That's the inference that I'm making from the way they treated the full ride at Florida for this person. So when I look at this, ASU's been working hard on it, but UCLA's been in the top 20 for years. They're not going to look at ASU and think you're on our level.
Right.
And so you're not going to get any leverage there. But I'd say that UCLA is the strong preference here. So now you've got UCLA. What happens with Northwestern? Because you go from 40,000 up to 110,000, but your employment in the power kind of ranking that I use goes from 45% up to 75%.
Yeah, Northwestern, 75%.
If you're looking for that high-paying or power job that will lead to a high-paying job, your chances at UCLA are slightly under 1 and 2. Your chances at Northwestern are 3 out of 4. That's a pretty big jump, but it does cost you $70,000 or so. So is that worth it? I think most of the times it would be. $70,000 for a 30% jump in those types of jobs is pretty good. Does the fact that, this person wants to be in the Western states and Northwestern is in the Midwest drive me nuts? No.
Yeah.
Northwestern's a top 14 school.
Yeah, that degree will travel.
Everybody knows what it is as it's portable, as they say. So for me, I probably would go with Northwestern. You're getting it at $110,000. It's a pretty good deal for a school that good. But you should probably try to leverage the UCLA offer and see if you can get Northwestern down another $10,000 or $20,000.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to have success with that because I think Northwestern's going to be like, sorry, UCLA's not on our level. That's how these schools operate. They're like, are you at our level? No, we don't care then. You see that every single time you kind of go through this process.
I will note as a slight disclaimer, footnote, asterisk here, the student mentioned having not negotiated anything with Northwestern yet. So that $110,000 cost of attendance was prior to any kind of like bargaining.
Exactly. I don't know if they'll be successful, but does it hurt to try? Never. Always try.
Never.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, I don't think they'll turn your back on you just because you asked for some more money off. I think we don't know, as far as I know, what that student ended up deciding.
I do not.
I'd be curious to hear
All
an update.
I know, I would say Northwestern, then UCLA, then ASU would be my preference there. But again, that's my preference.
Cool. Let's go to another one. Another trifecta of schools here. It starts, as always, hi, Dave. So familiar. Thanks for the helpful article. I was hoping you could provide me some insight regarding my current situation, that of prestige versus debt, of course. Here are the 3 schools under consideration for this particular student. There's the University of Arizona, ranked about 40. No COA listed, but they did get a full ride. The cost of living is cheap, and student graduate little debt. University of Minnesota, which is 21st in the rankings, half scholarship on resident tuition. And there's more to it. It's going to be a little more expensive, clearly, than University of Arizona. And then UC Berkeley, great school, but sticker price. This is, as the student notes, their dream school. And again, there's some more LRAP stuff and considerations in this, but those were the 3 schools: Arizona, Minnesota, Berkeley, in order of cheapest to most expensive. Student notes that they're typically very risk averse, which I assume means very debt averse, and out of undergrad for 6 years and wants to pursue public interest. My dream career, student says, would be in international human rights law. So there you go.
Yeah, so now public interest is in the center of the discussion, whereas in the prior discussion, it was out.
Right.
Important, as you noted, to say this is Arizona, not Arizona State.
Yes.
Now we get my homeland, Minnesota, where my parents and my sister both went, or all went, and then Berkeley. And so the way this had come in, there was a lot of information floating around. So I kind of summarized it for the student. I was like, so this is really what your choice is. A top 50 school for free.
Arizona.
A top 25 school for half off.
Minnesota.
And then a top 10 school for full ride.
Berkeley.
Yeah. Now, if you're thinking, well, what does that mean? Free, 50% off, full cost. Again, there's no such thing as free, but we'll just put Arizona at 0. Minnesota would be about $130,000. And then Berkeley would be around $300,000. It depends on your living style and, if you're living large or not. That is a classic lineup as you would ever see, because if very risk adverse is debt adverse, well, your Arizona offer is solid. I've got a friend at Arizona right now. She's doing well. She really enjoys it for free. It's hard to beat that. Mm-hmm. However, this student threw on a couple of things that I thought were very interesting about the commitment to social justice and the dream career in international human rights law. And one of the things that happened was that Minnesota has a really strong program in that, and they gave her kind of selection as a Rubina public interest scholar. So she would get automatic summer funding and direct guidance in counseling. And so there's a certificate that comes out with it. There's clinics that they run. There's placement and connections that you automatically get from that are right up her alley. Just as a comparison, Berkeley would have a lot of those things as well, and is obviously a school that is well known for public interest and so forth. So it's not as if Berkeley doesn't have that. Arizona, less so. What's really being said here is that Minnesota has a special program specifically focused on her interests. Like then again, and being from Minnesota, I can say this and nobody can get mad at me. It's Minnesota. It's a top 25 school. I think they've been doing really well. They got fantastic facilities. It's beautiful there in the summer. It's a huge campus, but it's not going to draw the same way Berkeley draws. And you can see why this person says Berkeley is my dream school here. So for me, when I looked at the kind of comparison between Minnesota and Arizona, if you're really truly debt averse, this question isn't, there's no other answer other than Arizona.
Arizona, yeah.
If this is like you have an absolute fear of taking on any kind of debt and you just don't know about the future, well then it's a top 50 school. It's free. Go there. However, if you want to start playing into your strengths, Minnesota's not the worst choice here. At 130,000, I don't love that. I wish it was more like 60. But I can see where Minnesota would be attractive because they're putting you into a program that is designed specifically for what you are into and what you want. And then the loan repayment program can help you out further with that. And that's another thing. Berkeley has a really strong loan repayment program. It's well known that it is something that will really work positively. And so kind of what I said was, I need more cost information on this. I feel like Minnesota is better for you in terms of this, but I also feel like Berkeley could be a decent choice. But $300,000 for a top 10 school versus free for what's a top 40 school? If you're debt averse, it's going to be hard to turn down Arizona. So what you need to do right now is go chart out every cost and then look into the effects of the loan repayment program on your long-term debt.
Yeah.
That's the way to figure this out, because a lot of times people are like, well, the debt was $60,000. And what I like to say is, what's that per month? And then a lot of times the answer you get is, I'm not sure. I'm like, this is where you need to find this out, because you, my friend, are the one that's going to be repaying this.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to map these things out in much greater detail than most people do. And if there's one maybe takeaway from this entire discussion of this particular scenario, it might be that. Sit down as you make your own decisions and chart out every single penny as best you can.
Yeah, because if you look at Arizona free and Berkeley at $300,000, you're like, ridiculous to go to Arizona. But if you get loan repayment and assistance, that all of a sudden drives that Berkeley number into a different zone and obviously lower, well, maybe then Berkeley all of a sudden is the better choice.
Yeah, it completely changes the arithmetic here.
Yeah, I had a friend and a former teacher that I had worked with, and she went to Harvard. And she came out of Harvard and immediately worked in death penalty law, which was really fascinating, and ended up getting a lot of her loans taken care of through that. And then eventually ended up becoming a judge. So, was able to kind of like parlay it that way. But coming out of any school, whether it's Berkeley or Harvard or what have you, and having to pay full ride, that can be really daunting. So if there are programs that allow you to work in your field of interest and will help repay the loans, you need to explore those. You can't just kind of guess as to whether or not $300,000 at Berkeley versus $130,000 at Minnesota versus supposedly zero at Arizona is a rational comparison. It's not. The repayment programs will have an immediate effect on that. Yeah. So look into those.
Yeah, great advice. Again, another student we don't know, at least I don't know what they chose, but I think you at least pointed them in the right direction to make a good decision. Let's look at a slightly narrower comparison or consideration here. Here's the next one. They forego the high and just go Dave. First of all, I want to thank you for creating this forum. Your blog has been such a great source of help to me. These are the two schools, so just two, that they are weighing versus one another. There's Cornell, ranked around 13 or so. with about $168,000 in total debt. And there's BYU, ranked 37th, but only about $32,000 of total debt. So roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of about $135,000 difference between those two schools. So Cornell at 13, BYU at 37, about $130,000 difference. Here are the considerations we've been given by this person. I hope to do big law for a couple of years before returning back to my country, so they want to save some money. I would love to live in a big city or close to a big city, and I do not want to stay in Utah when I graduate, but I could potentially live in Utah for free while I attend law school, hence the BYU. So that's an option. They don't want to stay there, but they could live there through law school potentially for free, which could drop that $32,000 debt even further, I assume.
Yeah.
Cool.
And this guy had done BYU as an undergrad.
Yes.
So
yes. Family
that was
there.
the key
They know
thing.
they know the campus. They know the city. I've only felt good about the thought of attending Cornell, but I'm terrified of the debt. Conversely, I've only felt good about taking the full ride from BYU, but I'm terrified of spending another 3 years in Provo.
What an awesome encapsulation that is.
It's wonderful.
Well, I have to say that when I read this, I smiled because I was like, this is such an interesting choice. So BYU has generally low cost and is often considered a really good deal for law schools.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
In this case, he's Mormon, so he understood everything about what you'd be getting into by attending BYU. And if you're Mormon and you attend BYU, it's no big deal. That's your university. If you're non-Mormon and you're considering BYU, look at it carefully, because it is different than other schools, and there are stipulations that they want to put on your behavior that is something that not everybody might agree with. So don't just wander into BYU thinking I can just keep on living necessarily the way you were before.
Yeah, we wouldn't make it 20 minutes.
BYU is not my, I've worked with Mormons before, and I've always found them to just be really awesome. And that's a terrible generalization, to just take a group of people. But I've always found them to be really kind of like fun and interesting and certainly like quality people. I just couldn't live there. It wouldn't be for me. It's a little bit too restrictive. I'm sure anybody who's a longtime listener of this podcast can understand why.
Yeah, I don't think we have to elaborate on that.
You would be thrown out much faster than me.
It's weird anytime I cross the state line into Utah that no one stops me.
I will say this about Utah. That is a gorgeous, gorgeous state. They've got some national parks there that I think are just mind-blowing, man. Bryce is just fantastic. Zion is one of my favorite national parks in the world.
Yeah, Deer Valley is some of the best skiing I've ever done in my life.
There you go.
It's just the after hours that are lacking.
We like our after hours.
Yes, we do.
So, all right. So this is interesting, though, because he understands all that. He spent 4 years. He also made a point about, look, I'm not going to practice in Utah. He said, I would definitely not want to stay here. I want out. And so that's a real problem for me, because when we start looking at things, a lot of BYU's placement is quite naturally into Utah. And so we got a debt issue at a top school versus kind of like a real conundrum as far as like living here and working here in the future. Mm-hmm. So what I said to him was, let's break this down into a couple categories. First off, let's look at jobs. And I kind of use that power employment, which is large firm employment and clerkships. BYU's is about 25%. Cornell's is about 75%. So Cornell has 3 times the placement power. They've got 75% of their graduates going to really what are the best jobs out there. That's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. There's a big debt price for this. To get that 50% improvement in outcomes, or 50 percentage points improvement, you're talking about $135,000 in difference. Now, on the grand scheme of debt, we were just talking about Minnesota at $130,000. This is Cornell at $135,000. So he's actually getting some pretty good offers overall. But to me, the real clincher was what he said about location. And I actually, when I replied to him, I said, I'll quote your words back to you. I'm already tired of Provo and could really use a change of scenery and a different school experience. I would definitely not want to stay in Utah when I graduate. He's basically like, his heart is screaming out, I must leave. Do not keep me here. I will die with another 3 years here in Provo. And I'm not very familiar with Provo, so I can't say one way or the other, but that's what he's saying. And so for me, the first and the third points, the jobs and the location really skew towards Cornell. Obviously, there's the debt that skews towards BYU. My lean on this is probably Cornell.
Yeah, mine too.
You're gonna if you want that big law job, you can work in New York City. Your chances are really good getting it out of Cornell. You can see that in the numbers. BYU sounds like a personal nightmare for him. And why would you want to put yourself through that? Because as we were just talking about earlier, if you're not enjoying yourself, you're going to struggle to do well. And why not try something new, try something a little bit different, and get away from something you're not going to enjoy.
Yeah, I mentioned that piece of advice would come back up, and here we are. And I don't think it's the last time that you'll hear us say, make a decision on schools, at least in part, determined by where it is you think you'll thrive. You'll be happiest, you'll be most successful, you'll be most enthusiastic. Law school's torturous in many ways, but it doesn't have to be as bad as possible. This is one way you can actually mitigate some of it.
Exactly. And I was also happy with that discussion because it's now down to 2 schools.
Yeah,
instead of 3 and 4.
Yeah, we can keep that train running.
Let's do it.
The next one is only 2 schools as well, 2 good ones. One we've talked about a little bit already, and another that's going to be a little bit new to the discussion. Hi, Dave. Back to more formal. I have 2 offers to consider. Here are the 2. There's Northwestern. Again, some debate about the ranking here, 9, 12, somewhere in there. Around $100,000, basically, in loans in debt, presumably. And then Columbia, ranked 4th, about $200,000 in loans. So you go from Northwestern to Columbia, and you essentially double the cost, $100,000 to $200,000. This person wants a clerkship, at least initially. I picture myself working in big law for a few years, then transitioning to public interest. They say they're not married to the plan, but we'll go on that. I would also really like to attend Columbia, so they make no bones about it. I love NYC. I've never visited Chicago, Morningside Heights, and frankly, I like its prestige. Who wouldn't? So that's what we have to go on. A personal preference, a desire for clerkship, and maybe some big law opportunities for a few years. But $100,000 difference in the 2 schools.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the hiring, Columbia, it's hard to say that it's worth the extra $100,000.
Well, yeah,
I know it's
numbers.
Columbia. Yeah, I know Columbia has got name brand recognition that's like, whoa, it's Columbia. But when you actually look at like the power employment that we were talking about, which is, again, all clerkships, state, federal, as well as employment at large law firms, Northwestern's number is about 75%, as we just went through. Mm-hmm. Columbia's 80%.
Yeah.
So they're pretty similar outcomes, yet in this case, Columbia is going to cost $100,000 extra. So if this was just a conversation about like, well, which one would you choose? I'd be like, take Northwestern's offer and run. You got it. You've made a great deal on terms of the school. The debt is handleable. Your outcomes are so similar as to be nearly indistinguishable. So the wrench in the whole works comes in when he's like, yeah, I really want to attend Columbia. I've never been to Chicago, but I love New York City and I love Morningside Heights and I'm drawn to the prestige.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want Columbia on their resume, right?
Everyone wants that. This is the classic Harvard versus, any other school. It's like, well, I want Harvard on it or Yale or whatever the school is. So when I look at that's really tough because financially the clear call here is Northwestern.
Sure.
But Columbia is really an amazing school, and it's one of those lock type of schools that you get with schools like Harvard. But you're not going to have any flexibility in terms of coming out. If you go to Columbia, you are locked into getting one of those big law type of jobs or getting that clerkship and then being able to pay this off. You don't have any flexibility. And
because you're saddled by that extra $100,000 in debt. You mean?
Yeah. Yeah, Northwestern at that cost gives you a little bit more flexibility. If you found something that was maybe a little outside the mainstream, but you were really attracted to it, you have more options at that point. So what you're really saying is if I'm going to take on an extra $100,000 in debt, I'm going to limit my future options and I'm going to put more pressure on myself to get that, kind of like top level, top shelf outcome. So That's what I told him. I was like, you need to sit down and really think about this because you have a plan, but then you immediately qualify by saying, I'm not really married to the plan.
Right.
I'm like, you're about to be married to the plan if you take Columbia. Columbia for $200,000 is a lot of money. It's obviously the name brand that you're buying there, and that can easily pay off if you get the right job and things work out just fine. There's no guarantee that happens, so you better make sure that this plan that you have in mind is truly the plan that you want. I would have taken Northwestern, even though I'm not the biggest Chicago fan, mainly because of the Bears. So I'm a Vikings fan.
I knew sports were going to come up.
I don't like the White Sox, and I don't like the Bears because I'm a Twins and Vikings fan. So,
yeah, sports aside, I think Northwestern's probably the right call here. But again, it's, you can't legislate taste or personal preference. If this person's really committed to the idea of living in New York and going to the school that is, I think, more reputable, maybe the $100,000 is a price worth paying for that.
Yeah,
it probably wouldn't be for me nor for you, but
no, it wouldn't be for either of us. But I can tell you this much: if I had to put money down on the choice they made, I bet they chose Columbia.
Yeah, that's exactly where my money'd be too.
Yeah, and I think for their viewpoint and the way they strongly feel about they want to live in New York, I think that actually plays right to the idea of what we've been talking about. If you're going to be happier there, and you can deal with that debt, I can see that as a defensible choice here.
Yeah, no, if this person came back and said they went to Columbia, I wouldn't think they made a mistake.
That's exactly right.
Perfect. While we're talking some fairly prestigious schools, let's look at maybe one and a half more. I know there's one at the end we need to at least glance at. This next person, hi Dave. I read the article, found it immensely helpful. I'm happy to see that you're still answering questions, because of course you are. Hopefully you'll have time to respond to mine. My options are currently narrowed down to, and here are the schools, Michigan and Harvard, and maybe NYU, if they get a scholarship. A little bit more about this. So let me run through these three schools in terms of cost of attendance or debt, and then I'll tell you more about the person. There's Harvard, which is going to cost about $137,000 estimated. That's the debt. Not bad for a Harvard degree.
True.
University of Michigan. Interestingly, the cost of attendance here, this person kind of estimates a range from $0, presumably because they have a place to live, to about $24,000. And then NYU, which is $80,000 to $90,000, depending on, again, a scholarship that hadn't been confirmed yet or negotiated. And then they make the point of, I'd only consider going to NYU if I got full tuition. I really want to leave New York. Good to know. The person says they're fairly debt averse. Okay. They're from Ann Arbor, could live at home free. This is why the Michigan cost was so low. If they go to UMich, want to end up back in the Midwest, ideally Chicago. And, as it says here, I want to continue pursuing public interest work in law school. Don't really care about big law, don't want to work those hours, not writing it off, though. End goal, living a comfortable life, doing interesting work. How original. My ideal role would be as a policy counsel or advocacy at an advocacy organization. I'm fairly certain I'd like to clerk for at least a year after graduating. So that's probably more information than we needed, but that's ultimately the goal. No one gunning for this big law career.
That's important because that means that this debt becomes a problem. The first thing that I would do in this decision is I'd kill off NYU. I mean, they made it clear, I really want to leave NYC. That's a direct quote here. They'd only consider it if they got full tuition, and if they did, that would change things. But Michigan, to me, is clearly the superior choice. They don't want to be in New York anymore. Michigan is $25,000 down to conceivably zero. They're from Ann Arbor, so they know what they're getting into. They want to stay in the Midwest. Having low debt completely serves their interests in terms of their career aspirations. I don't even understand why NYU's in this conversation. Michigan seems like the better choice to NYU instantly.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we're really down to Michigan versus Harvard. And about 100, and let's take the high end of their Michigan estimate, which was about $25,000, and compare that to Harvard, which is about $110,000 to $15,000 more.
That's exactly right.
And this is where we run into basically just the debt algebra.
Yeah, there was some other commentary too about I have interest in food sciences and food law, and the Kennedy School is at Harvard. And I made the point, I'm like, is that kind of point of interest in the name Harvard worth an extra $110,000 here? when the alternative in terms of employment and reputation, it's a little bit less, but it's still really good, man. It's Michigan. It's just, I can't imagine paying $100,000 more when pretty much everything else that you want is completely satisfied by Michigan. Plus, you're not carrying $100,000 in debt anymore.
Minimum, by the way. Yeah, this is on the high end of Michigan's cost, and it's still about $110,000, $115,000 different.
Yeah, so for me, this was one of those ones where it's like, you notice how a lot of the analysis that I do is when you have 3 or more schools, I'm trying to knock one out first. Yeah. I'm trying to use one of the schools or both of them to knock out one of the choices so that we can narrow it down to 2. And in a lot of these cases, you find there are really good reasons to do so. Not always. Sometimes it's like, it's pretty dicey and there's valid points for each school. Here, as soon as people start telling me, I don't really want to be here, I'm like, then listen to yourself, because you are telling yourself through writing this that this choice isn't good. So Michigan versus Harvard for me would be a solid Michigan win at these numbers and with this kind of career interest. And plus, I like Michigan as a school. Again, I don't like the football team. Sorry, Michigan fans. My brother-in-law went to business school there. My wife's whole family's from Michigan. So I tend to be a Michigan State kind of semi-fan because of that.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I think Michigan probably wins this one as well.
Yeah. Let's go to the last one.
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
This is one of my favorite ones that I've gotten because I was like, what? My response was so immediate. It's also kind of like amazing sometimes to get these kind of outcomes. And you've seen that we've done a real span of ranges. And sometimes people have such amazing offers. It just blows my mind. This one says, I just got some wonderful news. I got the Rubenstein scholarship at Chicago, and I also got into Harvard Law, and I'm waiting on Yale. I ultimately want to go into international or electoral politics. I'd love any advice on what you think would be the best move. So the Rubenstein at Chicago is a very prestigious scholarship. Like something like the Dillard at UVA, it pays for everything.
Yeah.
So you're talking about Chicago on the free with extra assistance from like faculty. You walk in connected. You know, it's like we just had the NFL draft. It's like you were like a high draft choice and you walk in and everybody wants to talk to you. The first round draft choice gets a lot more attention than the 7th round draft choice.
Yeah, this is a lot like starting on third base.
Yeah, you're almost home for the win.
Yeah.
Chicago for free with a whole bunch of connections and attention to start off with, or alternately, you want to pay Harvard at sticker price. This is not a choice to me. I wanted to run out with a hammer and be like, don't do the Harvard thing here. Why would you possibly take on, really like $300,000 in debt just because you kind of have some preferences there? And they were a little bit worried, I think, about like the big fish, small pond, kind of like relationship that you get. Right. I think they felt like they could go to Harvard and be anonymous, and in Chicago they'd be a little bit on the chopping block where people would be gunning for them. But seriously, debt-free? Come on. You've got to make that choice. This is the kind of thing where it's like everybody in the world would love this choice, and I would hope that 100 of them would be like, I'm taking the Rubenstein and going to Chicago. And anyone who didn't, I hope that their parents are billionaires, and it's like, who cares? I'll do what I want.
Right. Yeah, I think you and I both got this on Twitter, I believe, this message from this person, which congratulations, this person's quite an achievement. And I think your comment to me was, come on, bro.
It was. I was like, come on, bro, you got to go to Chicago here.
Is this even a choice?
It's not.
So occasionally we get a softball like this. It's just teed up where it's so obvious what to do that we don't have to make any bones about it. We don't have to qualify our advice. In this case, go to Chicago. Congratulations. Be happy. Yeah.
And they'd made a comment about being debt-free would enable me to make an unconstrained decision about what to do next. My friend, that is pure, unadulterated freedom.
That is bliss, man.
You walk out of school, you don't have any debt, you can take any job you want. Plus, you got a Chicago Law School on your resume, and that is a exceptionally well-respected law school. It opens doors. You're in the free and clear.
Yeah, no brainer here. No brainer. So some of these we obviously had to kind of put back into the court of the student. This was one where I could be like, if you don't go to Chicago, you're a fool.
We're going to run on down there and try to talk some
I'll
sense
sign
into
the
you.
paperwork myself for you. Go to Chicago.
That is right. I think that brings us to the end there.
Yeah, that's a good little mix. We've gone all the way from Harvard to the schools in the hundreds. So we got quite a range of considerations here.
And that's really what you want to do, is you want to kind of like use these tiers of schools to kind of compare. And as you look at it, this is always the way that it works. The higher ranked schools typically want you to pay more for the so-called privilege of going there. But that privilege is all about reputation, and reputation is supposed to translate into employment outcomes. So you got to start there. How good are those outcomes versus how much does it cost me? That is the essential trade that you are making here. That's the transaction. So focus on that first. But don't ignore how you feel about things. If you don't like an area, or you don't like a school, or you definitely want to leave a place, or you definitely want to go to a place, factor that in, because that has actual value in the long term. Every one of these decisions are ones where the person, except for the last one, could have made a different choice. And someone else could be sitting in their shoes and have made a different selection. So there's no right and wrong answer. It's only what's right for you. But you have to analyze yourself, your career goals, what you're getting at the school, what it costs, the exact employment outcomes, and all sorts of things like that. That's how you make these decisions. And it's tough when it's you. It's a lot easier for someone like me to say, go to Chicago and not Harvard. But keep in mind that you can apply the cold analytics that we try to apply to this just as easily as we do. John, any final words?
No. I mean, I think this more or less covered the ground we intended to cover. I suppose the only thing I'll say kind of circles back to where we started some of this discussion, which was LSAT-Flex updates. Which is just, we'll be learning more through the week, and we will continue to provide updates as information becomes available. So if you're still feeling a little in the wind, maybe with June, July, we'll do our best to keep you guys posted on what's going on as we learn it.
Yep, they've got another webinar coming up this Wednesday.
Yeah.
Not sure what, if anything, new they will announce. Obviously, we'll keep track of it, and then John and I will both post it on our Twitter accounts and everywhere else we float around.
Sure.
So. All right. On that note, let's call it a day. If you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you find it in the world. Give us a rating. And if you have any questions for a future episode, please send those questions to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On John's behalf and mine, we hope you stay safe out there. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.